So I grew up in a non-practicing Jewish home, and my father was very abusive. He was a really sick man. And he left us when I was 11, which was probably a good thing for us because I learned a lot from my mother. She taught me to never give up. But I also learned a lot in that time that carried with me for a very long time. I learned that I hated liars. And I learned that I hated bullies. And I learned that I hate quitters and people who cut and run, especially on their families. And I also learned to be ashamed. And in my shame from being left behind, from being somehow not good enough, even for my own father, I learned how to cover that up, and I ran. I ran from it. I ran by figuring out that if I could just be aggressive, and I could out-aggressive this shame that I feel inside, I could run away from that pain. I learned how to fight. But I still had that hole that was inside of me this entire time that I kept running from. When I graduated high school, I joined the Army. And after completing all the prereqs, I was assigned to the 2nd Ranger Battalion in Fort Lewis, Washington. And in this place, I found brothers that I never knew that I had. I found a family that I didn't know that I had. I found a sense of belonging that I had been craving my entire life, just desperate to be seen and feeling that shame inside of me. And I was rewarded for my aggressiveness. I was rewarded for my intensity. So by the time the war started, I had been there for 4 years, and we were training every day, day in and day out. And we were ready when the war started. And I was engaged to be married. When the towers fell on 9/11, my mother-in-law-to-be was in the fight of her life for cancer. 6 days after the towers fell, we called a justice of the peace over and got married in the living room. 2 days later, my mother-in-law died. And 3 days later, I deployed for my first time to the Middle East. I was overseas for about 3 weeks and was able to call home for the first time. And it's at that point that I learned that Kelly was pregnant with our son. 9 months later, I listened to him being born from a satellite phone while I was in Afghanistan. The last thing that I ever wanted to be as a father was absent, and that's the first thing that I was. And I chose it. When the war started, I was stuck between 2 families, my Ranger family and my new family. I didn't know what to do. But one thing that I did know is I was going to be damned if I wasn't going to experience that war. I had been training and I wanted to go. So I chose to go. And then I went home and I lied to my wife, who had just lost her mother, who was pregnant, carrying our child. I pulled the duty card. It's my duty. I have to go. I don't have a choice. I'm a victim of the circumstances. And whether I had a choice or not is quite irrelevant, frankly. Because in the end of the day, what is relevant is that it took me 10 seconds to make that choice, and it took me 16 years to tell the truth to my wife. By October of 2003, I had already been to Afghanistan multiple times. I was gone for basically the 2 years that we had been married. And Kelly and I had hoped to get some respite from the deployments. So I asked if I could go down to the Ranger Regiment headquarters so that I could be a part of the assessment and selection team, and I got granted that. And as we were packing our house, the 2nd Ranger Battalion got alerted again, and we all got blown back out to Afghanistan again for my 3rd time. The first half of this trip was to a place called the Nuristan province. You can kind of imagine it here in Colorado. It looks basically a lot like Colorado, especially when you get to the western slope area. So we were clearing towns and villages anywhere from 7, 8, 9, 10,000 feet, climbing up ice chutes. We were up there long enough for just about every one of us to lose 30 pounds and for all of us to get fleas. We were also there long enough for us to take our first KIA of the war. Sergeant J. Anthony Blessing was killed on November 14th, 2003, outside of Nangalam by a roadside bomb. My platoon and I were 20 kilometers up the valley, and I listened on the radio, and all I could feel was helpless. Everybody loved Jay. He was amazing. He was a friend. My friend was dead, and there was nothing I could do about it. My wife and kid were thousands of miles away. My son didn't even know who I was. And I felt like this war that I chose over my family was a sham. We would come back to Bagram just long enough to refit and get ready for the second half of the rotation. Round 2 of the rotation was up in a place called the Chagall Valley. Again, to paint a picture, Western Slope. That's all you need to know. So we get out there, and the thing about inserting on a mission, especially when there's a big valley, is that it can become particularly dangerous with large treetops and very strictly sloping terrain. We had the best pilots in the world, Task Force 160th, the Night Stalkers. They're incredible. And they said, we're going to try our best to back the ramp in and let you guys run off. We believe them, and they did their best. So there we are. We're coming into the Chagall Valley, weighted down for another month out in the mountains. And I'm sitting on the back of the ramp. I got 20 Rangers behind me, and I'm just watching. And I'm looking through my night vision, and the grayish sky is pixelated by little green dots, which are stars. And I'm seeing the ridgeline, and it's coming closer and closer. I give the 1-minute signal, and we're getting closer to the ridgeline. I can start to smell the JP-8 and feel the rotor wash coming inside the aircraft. Closer we go, closer we go. Right as we're about to touch the ramp down on the ridgeline, the bird jacks forward. And I'm suspended up in the air, held only by my safety line into the aircraft. Before I know it, I have the ability to look outside, and all I see is ground, sky, ground, sky, ground, sky. And I had a moment of realization. I'm never going to see my son again. Truth be told, there was no part of my Ranger story that ever included in my mind me living through it. You know, if I was going to go out in a fireball with a helicopter crash, I'd go out as a hero. Kelly and Jaden would be financially secure for the rest of their life, and they would be afforded the opportunity to get a new start with a husband and a father who was equipped to be a husband and a father. And then I had another thought. God, please save us. Ground, sky, ground, sky. The world eventually started to slow, and those blurring stars in my night vision started to become little points again. And even though my chest was being crushed by the force, I finally started to feel aircraft under my feet again, and we stabilized. We would end up deploying fast ropes, which is basically like sliding down a fire pole, except the fire pole is a rope, and it's not attached to anything but a helicopter. Ideally, you want to do that at about 10 to 15 feet. These were not ideal circumstances. As the rope master, I kicked out the rope, looked down, made sure that it landed on the ground, looked over, and rotated out into the blackness. We came down hot, so fast. The man behind me's machine gun came through, crushed my nod mount, broke my nose. He came down, broke his ankle. Another Ranger missed the rope completely, frapped in, and broke his back. So now we have a force that's got to be split to conduct the mission and extract our casualty. We would end up coming home from that mission, all of us, broken, but for me, aware. Aware for the first time, I did want to live. I did want to figure out, can I be a dad? Can I be a husband? Can I undo this mess that I have made with the lies that I've told? And that was reinforced in 2004 when I got to see our daughter born. I wanted to be a dad and a husband, so I got out of the Army in 2009. I just didn't know how to do it. I went 5 years with undiagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injuries, sleep apnea, spinal compression, you name it, all of it. Why? Because the way it works is that when you get out of the military, you have to go into the VA and tell them, I'm hurt. Now, I had just rangered for a decade, and that felt a lot like surrender. And surrender is not a Ranger word. So I did what most of us do, and I lied, and I kept running. I ran into work, success, alcohol, pornography, sex, anything that I could do to get away from the pain that I felt inside, from the memories of the war, and from what was going on in here. I kept running, but I couldn't get away from myself. And the nagging question, why is it that every time I feel like I'm going to die in combat, I'm asking for God to save me, but I don't ever acknowledge him otherwise? So I started asking questions. I asked questions of friends. I read books. I would go different places and ask questions. I argued with a lot of people for a long time. It was a lot of arguing. It was very suspicious. And ultimately, it led me to right here, right where we're standing. I walked into this place in 2012, intimidated, and a warm man with a kind smile named Rick said, hey, welcome. Glad you're here. And I thought, what's your angle? So I came back next week, and there he was again. And he was glad I was here again. And the next week, and the next week, and the next week. And Rick wasn't a veteran, but he befriended me. He cared for me. He did life with me. He didn't seem to bother that he wasn't a veteran. I didn't seem to think about it either. Rick ended up baptizing me and my wife and our son and our daughter. And I met Will, another guy who said, hey, do you want to hang out? And I was like, all right, I'll give him a go. He's cool. And we hung out over and over again, not a veteran. But he asked me questions, and he listened to my stories, and he cared for me. And in 2018, he asked, do you and Kelly think that you'd like to help us start a marriage ministry here at Mission Hills? And I said, you've got the wrong person. And he said, that's why you're the right person. So we tried. And when we started, Kelly and I sat down together, and we unpacked the real story. We unpacked 15 years. We made confessions. We gave forgiveness, and we moved forward together. On December 22nd, 2018, Kelly and I reclaimed what was to have been our original wedding date right here on this stage with Rick and Will officiating and our son and our daughter standing right beside us. You know, Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I had been running my entire life, and I finally found rest. I had known war and fighting my entire life, and I finally know peace. And I finally know home. Thank you for listening.